Aloha. Welcome to ThinkTech Hawaii's Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers, interviews with folks who have special insights into education from preschool all the way through higher ed. I'm Jim Shon, your host, and today we're talking with someone who has been involved with the union movement and public education, one of the most respected voices in education, Joan Husted. Joan, welcome to the show.
And thank you for those nice words.
Yes, and so we start with how you started. Did you start as a teacher or what,
No, actually, my mother was a school teacher, and I vowed I'd never be a school teacher. So I didn't have a teaching degree, and I went off to become an insurance underwriter in Chicago during a recession, and didn't last long. Came back. The only people they were hiring were school teachers. And Michigan granted 3-year emergency licenses. So I said, oh, okay, I'll go do that. And fell in love with teaching, went and got my credentials. Was lucky enough to get a federal grant to get my counseling certificate. And I was committed.
So were you teaching, counseling, both? What?
I taught, in a couple of my jobs, I taught part-time and was a counselor part-time. And then when I came to Hawaii, I was a full-time counselor at King Intermediate in Kaneohe.
I see. So in some ways, it was an opportunity for a job career that drew you into it.
Yes.
But then you were hooked.
I was hooked.
Yes, yes.
And actually, it's a good way to do it because you don't understand the philosophy of teaching or methodology until you've done it without any background.
I see.
And then you go, oh, I think I better learn how to do this.
So you're not remembering all those courses. You're
That's right.
learning it on the job.
That's right. And thank goodness my mother was a teacher.
And so you were at intermediate school, did you say?
Yes, King Intermediate, when it first opened up in Kaneohe.
So just about to hit puberty for those kids?
Yes.
And, yes. And,
yes. I went to my principal, because I was a 12th grade counselor in Michigan. And I went to my principal, Sam Kakazu, who I think was probably the best principal in the state. And I said, Sam, what are they? because 1 minute they're crying and they want you to help them, and the next minute is, Miss, leave me alone.
Yes.
And I'm going, Sam, I don't understand them. And he said, I never did.
Yes.
So,
well, that's an interesting experience then, because not only are are teachers required to teach subjects, regular teachers, but they're at this particular moment in child development. Talk a little bit about that middle school challenge for any teacher.
well, first of all, I was very fortunate because Sam Kakazu, I think, was a brilliant principal. He has since passed on. And King was to have been Hawaii's first middle school, along with Kailua Intermediate, to try to deal with these changing hormones. Now, King was only a 7th and 8th grade school. We did not have the 9th graders. And I'm a great believer 9th graders don't belong at the intermediate level. They're too mature. They're a little bit more sophisticated. It took a long time for me to figure out these kids. But kids are kids regardless of where you teach them. If you respect them and you respect their opinions and you're fair and you're even-handed with them, they respond. And the best teacher in our school was probably our toughest disciplinarian, Janice Gu. And kids might cut out of the 3rd period class, but they never cut out of Janice Gu's class.
I see.
And we used to say, what's going on? Well, she's always fair. She's always good to us. She never lies to us,
So, and I have heard over the years that middle school in particular is, people try to craft a special kind of curriculum or environment for that age group, yes?
Yeah. No, a true middle school is designed. It's not simply an intermediate that you slapped a 6th grade
I see,
into. And unfortunately, many places have done that. They do have, there's a particular curriculum for the middle school. You move kids up from the more nuclear elementary school where they might have only one teacher, and then you move them up. King was designed as a middle school that would have two separate houses. the 7th grade house and the 8th grade house.
Mhm.
And they would share the library and the cafeteria in common. But other than that, you kept the kids pretty separate. Many of our middle schools in Hawaii are simply schools that have added the 6th grade.
Mhm.
And they don't necessarily have teachers who are trained to deal with middle school kids. They're high school teachers. A lot of them are high school teachers who find themselves at the middle school.
I know that I've been at public meetings where the parents of the prospective 6th graders were quite upset that their kids were going to leave that elementary school, that warm, fuzzy.
And we call it a nice nuclear elementary school.
And you're going to throw them in with those older, bad kids.
That's right.
Yes.
And that's one of the fears parents have, or guardians have, about moving kids from elementary to middle school.
Right.
Because of the hormones and the fact that kids are trying to discover exactly who they are and are very good at pushing limits. Middle schools tend to be a little bit more chaotic than elementaries. So it's understandable why parents might say, you mean you're going to go from Mrs. Hiraki's class and you're going to go and you're going to have 10 teachers?
Yes.
You know, and very, very, we used to orient our 6th graders. King Intermediate had 6 feeder elementary schools.
6, wow.
And so we would do an orientation for the 6th graders. And I always remember this one youngster at Heia Elementary. He says, "Oh, I hear King's a rough school. What happens when you misbehave at King?" And we looked at him and said, "Nobody ever misbehaves at King." And with that, he simply sat down.
Yeah.
But you have to establish the ground rules pretty quick when they come up into school.
And that trauma, perceived or real, at that stage in the education pipeline, is also affecting when people decide to pull their kids out of public schools and go to private schools.
Right. There's Melman did a study a number of years ago that the number one reason that people pull their kids after elementary school and don't send them to middle schools or junior high schools or intermediates, whatever the school district calls them, is they're fearful of the climate of the school, the behavior of kids in a school. So it's really important for a middle school to establish the rules with kids right away, to let them understand that just because you're a 7th grader now does not mean you get to swing from the fluorescent lights. We don't tolerate that in our school.
Yeah. Is the transition not as traumatic from middle to high school, you think?
Well, 8th graders are a little bit more mature. I'm not a believer of putting 9th graders into the middle school or the junior high school or the intermediate, whatever you want to call it, because I think there's a definite maturation period. But 8th graders get a little apprehensive. Our 8th graders were going to Castle, and they were a little apprehensive, but they settled down pretty quickly. You know, about mid-9th grade, they seem to have figured out how to play the game.
It sounds like this counseling role has really prepared you for dealing with teachers and being a part of the teachers' union, knowing sort of the psychology of that environment.
Right.
So how did you get involved with the teachers' union?
Well, actually, I was involved with the Michigan Education Association. Michigan was one of the first states to pass a collective bargaining law for public employees. So in my school district, we started bargaining and got a real eye-opener when the chair of the Board of Education took the petty cash box, dumped it on the bargaining table and said, "Split it up, it's your pay raise." But shortly afterwards, I left Michigan and came to Hawaii. So when Hawaii passed its law, they were looking for people who had bargaining experience. And my fellow counselor, Burton Okino at King's, cousin was the head of the Hawaii Education Association. He said, "Oh, Joan has experience."
Yes.
And so they called me up and asked if I would be interested. And that's actually how I got involved.
So even though one of your parents was a teacher, that was not necessarily a union environment?
No, my dad was Ford Management.
Oh, okay.
My father was Ford Management.
Yes.
Yeah. Though he had a great appreciation for unions. He used to be very frustrated because he said so many union workers didn't know their contracts. He knew their contract better than they knew their contract. But my mother walked the picket line, so
So
she understood what that was.
Feistiness
Yeah,
there,
well,
yeah.
and it was in the 60s, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, and schools were kind of a hotbed of organizing people to stand up and say, wait, there's a better way of doing it.
Now, Hawaii has collective bargaining guaranteed by its constitution.
That's right. It's the only state, I think, in the union that collective bargaining is a constitutional right.
Do you remember when that came in? Was that?
I think the Constitution was changed by a vote in 1969. The law went into effect January 1st, 1971 for all public employees.
I see. So right away there must have been a certain amount of rivalry between different groups that wanted to be certified as the voice of the teachers? Yes.
Well, in order to be a collective bargaining agent, you had to be voted in by the teachers. Now, the law said that everyone who was paid on the teacher's salary schedule was in bargaining unit 5. Okay, so now they're in bargaining unit 5, but who's going to represent them? Mm-hmm. And there was the Hawaii State Teachers Association, which was an affiliate of NEA through the HEA. There was the Hawaii Federation of Teachers, which was an affiliate of the AFT through the AFL-CIO. And then there was another group called the Hawaii, what were they called? The Hawaii Independent Teachers, HIT, and they didn't believe in collective bargaining. So what they wanted everyone to do is vote no, we don't want collective bargaining for teachers.
I see. So the American Federation of Teachers is more associated with industrial unions.
Yeah, that's right.
And the HSTA, the Hawaii State Teachers Association, more with a kind of educational professional.
In fact, we didn't call it collective bargaining, we called it professional negotiations.
Oh, I see.
So we had a representational election. You had to get majority, 50 plus 1. We did not make it. We were 42 votes short. So the two top vote getters, which was HSTA and AFT, then went into a runoff.
I see.
And we won the runoff by 600 votes. So
I see.
And then we were at the bargaining table within a month.
Now, right now, there's like some 13,000.
500 teachers.
Yeah, in this collective bargaining unit,
That's right.
Back then, in the 70s, how many are we looking
About
at?
9,200.
I see. So still quite a number.
Yes.
Yes. And so did you then just went full-time into working for HST?
Yes, they pulled us out of, there was a bargaining team composed of 5 teachers. I chaired that team. And then there was a person brought in from the National Education Association, John Dunlop, who was an experienced negotiator who became our chief spokesperson. And we went right to the table. We had the governor's negotiator, Jack Reynolds. Richard Ondo was the chair of the Board of Education. And we went at it.
Well, that's very interesting. And we're going to take a short break, but right after that, I want Joan to tell us what that's like to prepare for and to actually negotiate. We'll be back in 1 minute.
Hi, Jay.
Hi, Keith.
My name's Keith Bettinger.
I knew that.
And I'm the host of ThinkTech Asia.
I knew that too.
Here on ThinkTech.
Fabulous. You got a great show going, Keith.
Thank you very much. And for our viewers out there that are interested in ThinkTech Asia, it airs every Tuesday from 4 to 4:45. And it can be accessed online at thinktech.com.
Yeah, so what kind of guests you like?
Well, we have a number of guests from academia, from practitioners of international affairs. Sometimes we have military officials. Sometimes we have public officials on the show. And our goal, we try to talk about current issues in South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and Central Asia, all throughout the Asian realm in more depth than you would find in traditional mainstream
That's
media.
the difference, isn't it?
Exactly.
That you're reaching out beyond what ordinary news media would do.
Right.
That's why we like you so much.
We're trying to provide a thinking person's perspective, an intelligent perspective on what's going on and where both sides of the story, or even when there's more than 2 sides, we try to cover every angle. And I think that that's one of the big benefits that we provide here at ThinkTech, is it's a really innovative source of educational programming for the people of Hawaii.
You're great, Keith. You are a great host. You got a great show going on. I watch it every week.
Thanks very much.
Why don't
Jim.
you guys watch it every week too, okay?
4:45 to 4 to 4:45 every Tuesday.
Aloha, welcome back to ThinkTech Hawaii's Education Movers, Shakers, Reformers. We're talking with Joan Husted, who started as a counselor and then went on to be involved with negotiations. Joan, most people have no idea what collective bargaining is. It's done in private. Can you take us through, the preparation and what it's like to be at the table?
Well, it's interesting because you're right, most people don't understand collective bargaining except they negotiate every day of their lives. Every parent negotiates with their kids. You negotiate with the person you're buying the car from. So there's no real mystical quality about it. The way we put proposals together is we went out and asked our bargaining unit, what is it? How would you like your working conditions? How would you like your teaching life to change? What is it you'd like to do differently? There were some things organizationally we needed to have happen. One, there were certain rights HSTA wanted, like the use of the bulletin boards, the use of the mailboxes, the right for our staff to go on school campuses, and then, of course, the ability to file grievances if there was a violation of the collective bargaining agreement. In fact, having a grievance procedure is actually mandated by law. It's just a matter of how you work it out. Then you pull your proposals together. It's a little more difficult it was more difficult in the early days because you didn't really have a track record to take a look at. Now it's a whole lot easier because you take a look at what kinds of grievances do you have, what kinds of concerns are raised, what is the Department of Education proposing to do, what are some of the national changes that are going on that might impact your collective bargaining agreement. And then you put proposals together. Now, in the early days, we did what we called positional bargaining. I put together a proposal, my team.
Give me an example of a proposal.
Beginning teacher salary shall be $45,000.
Okay.
That's a position.
Okay.
And the state may come in with a position that says beginning teacher salaries will be status quo. So you've got two positions. And for the first 20 years, that's the way we pretty well bargained. And then the parties decided that we would do more collaborative bargaining. In other words, okay, we'll do it by objectives. So the objective might be, we want to be able to attract the very best teachers into the Department of Education. And then the parties begin to work at how can we do that? What are the different ways of accomplishing that? Now the governor is an important member of the state's bargaining team. He is actually the chief negotiator. And when you get to at the gubernatorial level, you're kind of into positional bargaining. They have X amount of money.
But does the governor actually show up?
Oh, yes. In fact, in our collective bargaining agreement, some of the preparation period language of the collective bargaining agreement was written by John Burns. The only governor that we never really saw at the table was John Waihee. Other governors have always come to the bargaining table. John Burns was the only one who actually wrote language. But governors would come. Linda Lingle would come to the table and say, this is how much I've got to give. I've got nothing more. And your economic people, we always had people on the team who studied the state's budget and the taxes and what have you, would tell you, no, there's more to give. Or no, she's right, that's the most that we're going to be able to squeeze out of the state.
So there's a preparation period where you're
absolutely.
doing a lot of analysis. Is it difficult to get good data from the state in this case so that you can really understand their financial situation, or do they hide it from you?
Well, they're very reluctant to give it to you. In the early days of bargaining, there was a process called fact-finding. So if the parties agreed that they could not agree, it was called an impasse. And then the first step was mediation. So the federal mediator would come in and try to get you to agree. And if you couldn't agree, you went to fact-finding, and a panel of 3 fact-finders would take a look. It's kind of like a trial. You know, you submit your evidence, they submit their evidence, and then the fact-finding. And it was very difficult because the state was extremely reluctant to give up the worksheets. You had the budget, but what you wanted was the worksheets that would tell you how they arrived at those particular figures. And we had a great deal of legal haggling over whether they had to give up the worksheets or not. And finally, the court said you have to give up the worksheets. But I had a man on my bargaining team who was a genius. He was so good at calculating the costs of a collective bargaining agreement that the state actually relied on his figures rather than their own figures.
So how big is a team? I mean, you know, is it 2 or 3 or a dozen or?
Well, for HSTA, the team was composed of 5 teachers. The chief negotiator, who for almost 40 years was me, negotiation specialist, the president, and the executive director. The state's team would vary. Usually it ran 17, sometimes 20 people.
Wow.
Because you had the Board of Education, the Department of Education, you had Budget and Finance, you had the governor's representatives. And in the early days, they actually had the county's representatives, and they finally lost interest and they stopped doing that after a while.
So you had to do a lot of preparation.
Yes.
And you had to have a sense before you walked in the door how much you thought they could put on the table in the final form.
You had a pretty good sense of how much the state could afford. Now, one of the rules of thumb was, certainly for public employee bargaining, you are not in the business of putting the Department of Education out of business. You're not in the business of getting pay raises for teachers but laying off 2,000 teachers.
Right.
So you had to get kind of realistic. You could not go pie in the sky and say, well, we're going to strike if you don't give me 100% pay raise. You've got lots of money. You got a state budget of billions of dollars.
Right.
I mean, any bargainer who gets into that should get away from the table.
And you're bargaining for teachers, but you're not the only public employee union that's bargaining. So everybody's kind of watching everybody else.
Well, we didn't actually, to be honest, we never paid a whole lot of attention to what other units were doing for several reasons. Number one is teachers as an occupational group, they're really a craft group, and they're different than custodians. Okay. So UPW, for example, negotiated United Public Workers. And the best known are your garbage collectors, your custodians.
Prison guards, that's UPW.
They're UPW.
Yeah.
They're different. I mean, they have an entirely different work setting. So you're not as interested in when they got their breaks, you know. I'd be lying if I said you weren't conscious of what was going on. But we never got into the process of, oh my God, you gave the principals 0.1% more money than you gave the teachers.
Yes.
That just was unproductive.
And to clarify, the principals were a different union.
They're in Unit 6. They're
White
HGA.
Government Employees
Police Association, right.
Which is all the white collar folks at the tax department and
Yeah,
DVED
they
and
have
everything.
white collar, non-supervisory, white collar, supervisory. They have the nurses.
Yes.
And then they have a polyglot unit, Unit 13, which has librarians, harbor masters, waymasters.
I think I once was in Unit 13 because nobody knew where to put me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of the unit where nobody knows.
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, we were looking at that down the road of maybe the charter schools should be in that unit because it's just, everything else,
Yeah. Well, you want to keep people in the community of interest. So we were happy that at least the teachers in the charter schools were in bargaining unit 5 because that's the community of interest. So at the bargaining table, if you're doing formal positional bargaining, you exchange packages. And then you walk through and you want to understand the package. The worst thing for a negotiator is to misunderstand what's being asked.
By the other side.
By either, I mean, for them to misunderstand what I'm asking for,
uh-huh.
or for me to misunderstand. Because then you get all hoo-hoo. What are you asking for that for?
Yeah.
Well, no, that's not what we're asking, and you waste a lot of time.
Now, many people might think that the only thing you're really negotiating is the salary. And certainly that must be, but there must be other important items in that agreement that go beyond the salary or the non-cost items.
Yeah.
So,
Well, certainly salary is important. Now, the teacher unit is what we call a craft union. They're not an industrial model. They're interested in who enters the craft of teaching. We're interested in how they stay in the craft of teaching. How do they get the resources to practice their craft? So teachers are very interested in how can they have a say in what goes on in their schools.
yes.
How do people get in their schools, and what kind of qualifications do
You
they
mean
have?
assigned to teach
Yeah,
at a particular
yeah.
school?
Teaching is also very volatile, and it can be very political, and they want a certain assurance that they're going to have some safeguards, that a indignant parent isn't going to ask that they be fired because they gave their kid a C rather than an A.
Yes.
So they're very interested in protections.
Mm-hmm.
They want to make sure their kids are safe. We had a provision in our contract that if teachers felt that kids were in unsafe learning conditions, they had a mechanism to complain and bring that to the attention of the powers to be.
And this is a little bit different in Hawaii because you're negotiating for all the teachers in the state, one district, whereas on the mainland, you just have this, patchwork of different districts. If they're negotiating just within a much smaller, like for Maui or Big Island, that sort of
Well,
thing.
it's a little bit different now. Some states have gone to what they call coordinated district bargaining, where you might get Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti might get together, their school boards might get together with the two teacher unions that represent them and try to work out within a district. I always tell people, think of Hawaii for bargaining purposes as a large urban district. We're the second largest urban district in the United States.
So when you begin bargaining, is it a ritual of who goes first, or people make their speeches, we don't have any money, you have money,
In the early days, it kind of operated that way because teachers are the moving party. We're the ones who want to negotiate an agreement.
I see.
We generally went first.
You would go first.
Yes,
And they would figure out how to say no.
yes,
Yes.
yes.
And are there rules of thumb that a good negotiator should always keep in mind?
Yes, first of all, don't lie.
Uh-huh.
True bargaining is a process of relationships, and then fatigue and emotions are the two enemies of negotiators.
Fatigue and
And
emotion.
people will give up. They get tired of bargaining. Oh, yeah, okay, go do that. Or they get mad. And how dare you? I remember once at the bargaining team, I had to call for a recess because the state was talking about how they couldn't trust teachers to stay on campus. And therefore, they had to have them always check out of the office. And one of my teacher team members just got absolutely infuriated. And I called a recess and a caucus, and we went in. She said, let's get to the strike. This is nonsense. Well, you got to watch for that kind of behavior. You get into bad places when you lose your emotions.
I guess you have to also sort of psychologically get a read on who you're negotiating with on the other side of the table as well.
Well, the most important thing, and it's true for the employer as well for the union, is who has the ability to say yes.
Right. Yeah.
Because you can spend a lot of time at the table and then discover that the people sitting there don't have the ability to say yes. So we always were very clear to the employer that the team could say yes. We had the power to shake hands, but it would have to go to the negotiations committee, the larger 16-member negotiations committee, and then it had to go to our board of directors, and then it would have to go to the teachers, where the state didn't always have that multi-layer. We never hid that from them. And it was interesting because the state would say, well, your committee members are located here on the salary schedule, so if we give them this, they'll ratify it.
Fascinating. We're peering into the behind the curtain of what it's like to negotiate for public employees in general and teachers in particular. We'll be back in 1 minute. Another one.
Hi, I'm Jay Fidel. I'm host of Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, which is our flagship show, which plays 4 to 5 p.m. every Wednesday. And the supporters of that show are Hawaii Energy Policy Forum and Hawaii Energy. And luckily enough, we have representatives of both of them right here today to tell you more about what they think about the show. Sharon Moriwaki at my left is co-chair of Hawaii Energy Policy Forum, and she goes first. Sharon?
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. I'm so glad that we have this Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy. This was 2 years ago when we started this, and we have continued it because it's so important, and there's so many developments happening across the state, and we hope you'll tune in every Wednesday, 4 to 5. It's wonderful.
And Ray is Hawaii Energy. Ray, what is your thought about the same subject?
Well, I agree completely with Sharon that we are talking about every Wednesday, 4 to 5. We talk about some of the most important subjects that are affecting the islands now and into the future. Energy, clean energy, we need it. We often run into new ideas that we had not thought about before. We did just today, and I think we're going to have more of that in the future. So come on down and watch us 4 to 5 on Wednesdays, and we'll see what happens.
We'll see you then. Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha. Welcome back to ThinkTech Hawaii's Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. We're talking with Joan Husted, who for many years was chief negotiator for the Hawaii State Teachers Association. And Joan, we hear a lot about what's going on in the mainland and the I guess rivalries and tensions between union perspectives and school systems. Can you talk a little bit about where you see that public union movement going and how it's relating to education in the bigger sense?
Well, I think, in organizational development, you start off with forming and then you get into storming. And I think we're kind of back into the storming stage again, as education is in such a state of flux. We really don't know I don't think we really understand where we're going in public education. And that puts a burden on public employee, particularly teacher unions, principal unions. There are a few states in which principals are unionized. Hawaii's not the only one. Of where we fit in all of this. Now, the looming vulture in this is the Fredericks case, which the U.S. Supreme Court has just said that they are going to hear in December. Fredericks says that if you're not a member of a public employee union, the union cannot collect the bargaining fee. You can get the benefits, but you don't have to pay for them. That's probably going to change the landscape dramatically. But
why will that change?
Well,
Explain
because people will no longer pay a bargaining fee. Now, in HSTA, 12,500 teachers are voluntary members. They don't have to be members of HSTA. But 1,000 teachers pay just the bargaining fee. Well, they won't have to pay that anymore. And then the question is, will teachers feel that paying dues to HSTA worth it? Or paying dues to HGA be worth it? Or will paying dues to the United Public Workers be worth it? Or paying dues to HGA for the nurses be worth it? So we're going to be looking at whether we've done a good job of convincing our own members that it's worthwhile belonging to a union.
So this Fredericks case would trump even state law
Yes.
that would require union dues. Yes.
Yeah. So, well, the state law says you have to pay, they call them statutory dues. You're not a member if you pay statutory dues. But what's going to happen is, how can we navigate as a union our way through this changing landscape? There's moves now to eliminate teacher tenure, for example. I'm a supporter of teacher tenure because from my vantage point, it's no more or no less than due process. And criminals have due process. Why can't teachers have due process? It's not a lifetime guarantee to a job. Having defended teachers who have lost their jobs, I could tell you that. And HSTA did not defend every teacher who got fired. We took it up to the administrative level, but after that, if we said the state's got an ironclad case, no, we're not going to carry it on any further.
But there's also this creeping notion that teacher evaluations are another way in which teachers could be terminated if their students are not
Well, yeah, and then,
or-
basing a teacher evaluation on teachers' student test scores is very controversial, and I'm not a big proponent of that. I think there are ways of measuring teacher effectiveness looking at student achievement, but it's a very complex problem, and the question is, do schools really have the time to do the kind of evaluation that needs to be done? Teacher evaluation has always been in the HSTA collective bargaining agreement. And we had something called PATH, Program for Assessing Teaching in Hawaii, which was done by with our help, a company out of Palo Alto. PEPT, which was the teacher evaluation system, was done with help from Western Michigan University.
And these were formally adopted
They
through
were
collective
yes,
bargaining?
and they were in the collective bargaining agreement. The rubrics for how they operated were done through a process called meet and confer with the employer. The employer set up the rubrics. We had a chance to give our input on how we thought the rubrics should be written out. And we also took into account the fact that the span of supervision for most school administrators is so wide in Hawaii. It's no business in the state of Hawaii would ever tolerate the span of supervision most principals have.
That sounds like a technical term.
Well, in other words, how many people does the principal is responsible for evaluating?
Oh, in his school.
In his school,
or her
yeah.
school, yeah.
The ideal is 8 to 10 people.
Oh, the ideal.
Is 8 to 10
Well,
people in
that's-
business.
yeah.
And we both know that no principal has 8
Yeah.
to 10 people to evaluate.
Now, don't we have vice principals that can do
Yes,
this
well,
too?
some schools do.
Uh-huh.
Some schools have 30 teachers, custodians, cafeteria workers, custodians, and no VP. So you have to take a look at what that landscape looks like and how you can navigate it. And teacher unions that pattern themselves after the industrial model,
Right.
you know.
American Federation.
Well, yeah, some of them, and there were some National Education Association affiliates, particularly in states like New Jersey and what have you, who had kind of the kill kind of philosophy.
Poor New Jersey.
Have to kind of sit back now and say, how are we going to navigate this? How are we going to deal with this new phenomenon called charter schools?
Yes.
What is the role of teachers' collective bargaining in the core curriculum? What role do we have to say and how many tests and the quality of testing for kids in classrooms? To us, that's all part of the craft of teaching, and teachers ought to have something to say about that. And collective bargaining is the most viable way of giving them their word.
Now, I've heard you talk about something called two-tier bargaining,
That's right.
Which I guess is you have a master for everybody, but at a school level?
Yes, years ago, in the 1990s, in the mid to late 1990s, we took a look at our schools, and
We meaning the
the
teachers?
HSCA took a look at the schools, the negotiations team, and said, you know, none of our schools are alike. They're all very different, and yet you have a master agreement that treats them all like cookie cutters.
Yes.
So what would happen if we said to schools, you can make changes in the master agreement that fits your school?
Yes.
And so the state and HSCA, through the bargaining process, agreed to what was called two-tier bargaining. Everybody had the master agreement, but we piloted it. 3 schools in each district could change the terms of the agreement. there were some ground rules. Number one is you couldn't cut salaries. You could increase work time, but you had to pay for it, right? And a number of schools did it. And we also had a rule that the district could not override the principal.
Oh,
And we could not override the teachers who had agreed at the school level. Well, it didn't last very long. It lasted 2 years. The state had great difficulty. They didn't like where the principals were going. They thought there was rebellion going on at the school level. So when the memorandum expired, they refused to renew it.
however, charter schools have carried on this tradition. Yeah.
Well, when I was chief negotiator, we treated the charter schools differently than they're treated now. We didn't cover them with the master agreement. They could adopt the master agreement if they wanted it, or they could create a brand new agreement.
Yes.
Now, HSTA has put all charters under the master agreement, and you have to negotiate a supplementary agreement.
That's right, yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. And I've been involved with that as
Yeah.
well, yeah.
My problem with that is the master agreement was never designed for charter
No,
schools.
yeah.
You know, so you get some real anomalies, like the statewide class size ratio shall be 26.15 to 1.
Yes.
Now, how does that fit a charter?
No,
I never
it-
did figure that out.
It really doesn't, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, you've got this, tension that's not only negotiating, but it's also imposing a new way of evaluating teachers, right?
Yes,
And this, what I think personally is a great idea about this idea of two-tier bargaining, which sounds like what you're really trying to achieve for the teachers is a certain amount of empowerment at their own school level.
yep. Well, you're also empowering the school principal, because you don't have somebody from the state office saying, now you can't do this and you can't do that, and
Yes.
yes, you can do this. If we decide we're going to empower schools to make more and better decisions for themselves, I think we'll see the beginning of two-tier bargaining again.
It does seem that it adds authority to some teachers
Yes.
at a school that is no longer, or up to now, not allowed.
Yes,
You do have a school community council,
Yeah.
but they're not involved with governance or negotiation at this point.
yeah.
Do you see them as a willing partner in future two-tier bargaining?
I think so. We didn't have school community-based management or schools SCCs when we did two-tier bargaining. And I've given a lot of thought to it. I'm not quite sure how to do it. I think it can be done, but I'm not sure how to do it. But what you want to come away with at a school level is an enforceable agreement. That's in the best interest of everybody.
Right.
So if a school changes principals, the school community doesn't have to worry, there goes our
There goes the
agreement.
agreement, yeah.
If you change faculties
Uh-huh.
again. Or the school doesn't have to worry if the school community council significantly changes.
Yes.
That you're going, so you have some stability, and schools function best with stability.
And presumably, the character of that community, say it's on a rural neighbor island, will
Right.
look different than
Absolutely.
downtown Kaka'ako
Absolutely,
or something like that.
Absolutely. You have to deal, if you have a commuter community, your parent-teacher conferences are different. If you have a community in which your parents work 2 and 3 jobs, the involvement of parents is very different than it is where you have stay-at-home parents. The further away from the Lilio-Kalani building you get, actually the more flexibility you find that many schools have.
Yes.
We found that with our neighbor island schools who went, why are you having this problem? We don't have that problem.
Yeah, yeah, it does seem to me that that character of the community, the character of the school, does interface with this notion of a master for everybody. Some of the criticisms that have been made of our overall state system, that it's one size fits all, and maybe collective bargaining is a way to break through that.
Well, yeah. Well, remember, Hawaii was designed after a monarchy.
Yes. Oh.
Right.
Well, that's the final word. We're still in a monarchy. Thank you very much, Joan Husted.
You're welcome.
We've been talking with Joan Husted, who for many, many years has been a respected leader in our public education and in our public union for teachers. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week with another rendition of Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers.